So to begin, it is important to review SCC's architecture and associated VLANs of the underlay network. What is important to note here is that our demonstration focuses on a sandbox deployment. Your management enterprise underlay infrastructure network may differ from our sandbox implementation because VLANs and associated subnets are customized to your environment. During your pre-planning stage, it is important to work closely with your network administrator to plan in advance associated VLANs of your underlay infrastructure so that SCC is successfully deployed. The first diagram presented to you is just one of the network designs suggested to you. Step number 1 is to determine if you will need to deploy the SCC appliance as a VM guest within a hypervisor configuration or deploy the SCC appliance as a bare metal configuration. Step number 2 is to work closely with your network administrator to present and configure the appropriate VLANs to your underlay management network switches. The SCC appliance will require an external facing NIC, LAN 0, and an internal facing NIC, LAN 1. The external facing NIC will need access to the external internet to be able to pull down software dependencies that SCC's kernel will need to utilize. It is strongly recommended when communicating to the external network you set up a perimeter firewall or allow for proxy access so that SCC is successful on pulling software dependencies from mirrors that are connected to the internet. For the external facing NIC, you're open to choose any PVID VLAN you want. The internal facing NIC will intercommunicate to Docker containers that exist under the hood of SCC. In our example, VLANs 4050, 4051, 4053, and 4054 and the native VLAN 1 have been configured on your private switch. The switch port will need to be configured as a .1Q trunk, and associated VLANs in the range of 4000 will need to pass to each of the container interfaces as tagged frames. Remember to always pass VLAN 1 as PVID 1. Most switch configurations by default pass the native VLAN 1. There may be some switch implementations where VLAN 1 is not passed automatically. In our example, VLAN 1 of your private network switch underlay will be utilized to device discover BMC monitored host and will be important to pass redfish queries between agents southbound that will intercommunicate with the BMC to harvest rich metadata sent upstream to SCC's composer. If you choose not to utilize the discovery pool implementation, which intercommunicates with monitored BMC host in VLAN 1, you're open to use the manual pool where you can define customized static IP addresses that don't utilize the SSDP device discovery implementation of Redfish DMTF. In this case, you would configure a customized VLAN you choose to deploy for BMC management intercommunication. When you scale out your SCC underlay private switch network, you will need to pass the same associated VLANs on their uplink.1Q ports to interconnect switches that are interconnected together across racks within your data center. Hosts that you decide to have SCC monitored will also need to be interconnected to the underlay switch network because they will need to intercommunicate to the container interfaces. It is not important to have these BMC connections interconnected during SCC installation. You can focus on the cabling of its BMC interface later after SCC has been successfully installed. It is important to note during the SCC deployment that intercommunication of containers and external network communication to the internet are checked during installation. If any one of the network checks fail, installation will be suspended. If this condition were to occur, the SCC deployment would pick up where it left off and skip associated software dependencies required for SCC's installation. When SCC's deployment fails, you would simply rerun the Ansible setup script and either choose a CLI installation or GUI guided wizard installation. Later, we'll cover about how Linux bridges and ESXi standard VDS switches will be deployed within your hypervisor configurations.